Hey, class. For the next couple of podcasts, I'm going to discuss the very horrifying topic of the Holocaust and the mass murder of Jews. Um, Also, gypsies, homosexuals were targeted, the disabled were targeted, Jews above all were targeted, but a lot of people were caught up in Hitler's web. Although the Jewish community in particular wiped out in Poland and Hungary. Again, I'm sure everyone has a basic knowledge of it, but I do want to talk about it and give you a little bit of background in the context maybe of the Browning reading. And the first thing I want to say is that Hitler had made no secret of his obsession, I guess you would say, with racial purity. In Mein Kampf, the book that he wrote in the 1920s when he was thrown in jail for a couple of years, he talked about the Nazi notion of racial hygiene. And he wrote that Germany must see to it that only the healthy beget children. He wrote that, that's a direct quote, and that this be done by the modern medical means. So, what Hitler wants is he wants to create a Germany that is racially pure and that is going to dominate Europe. Now, he argued that the German people were Aryan, that the word Aryan derives from actually linguistics. It's the study of language, and it argues that Aryan languages, especially German, were superior in their structures and their variety and vocabulary to Semitic languages that evolved in the Near East. So, in other words, languages that evolved in Europe were superior to languages that evolved in the area, for instance, where Christ was born in the Middle East. And there was an extrapolation from that if the language was superior, then the character and the genetics of the people that spoke certain languages were either superior or inferior. And that, in other words, the Aryan people were superior to the Semitic ones, i.e., Jews. So, uh, this is his rationalization. And again, in trying to explain Hitler, I'm in no way justifying, of course, his bottomless pit of evil. But things, even evil things, have to be explained, I think, before they can be understood. So Hitler is obsessed with racial purity, racial hygiene. In addition, he uses the Jewish community politically. He scapegoats the Jewish community, which was a very successful community in Germany. It was very well integrated into the culture and the politics and the economics, the businesses of Germany. Jews had fought very bravely in World War One. Jews were basically German, right? But what happens is that Hitler scapegoats the Jewish community, and he blames the Jewish community with the defeat of Germany during World War One, the so-called stab in the back. And overhanging this, which is very important always to remember, is that when Hitler and a lot of other folks looked to communist Russia, they saw the Bolsheviks, they saw the communist rulers of the Soviet Union, they saw them basically of agents of the German community. So what you have with Hitler, you have this evil fusion with this obsession with race superiority, uh, plus political expedience. Everyone needs a scapegoat, right? Plus this genuine fear among a lot of Germans that the Soviet Union is a real existential threat to Germany because of the communist government, and that the Soviet Union is basically run by Jews. Okay? So Hitler fuses all these elements to create very powerful anti Semitic feeling in Germany, or maybe another way to put it is just indifference to the fate of Jews in Germany. Um, but let's not forget this notion of racial purity, because that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in the next podcast. So Hitler comes into power, and he immediately uh, he used this attack against Germans and communists. For Hitler, Jews and communists, I said Germans. For Hitler, Jews and communists were the same thing, okay? So basically the same thing. And in addition, the Jewish community had stabbed the German nation in the back, which led to the defeat in World War I. So he uses the Jewish community, or scapegoating the Jewish community, to vault himself into power. A Nazi newspaper, the motto of it was, "The Jews are our misfortune." The Jews are our misfortune. So Hitler is using Jews not only to become powerful, but also to consolidate his dictatorship once he gains power in the early 1930s. Once he comes into power, uh, Jews, as well as communists, but they lose their individual rights and their individual protections, as do all Germans. Freedom of the press, assembly, expression were all nullified when Hitler comes to power. Um, One of the things I think I pointed out in an earlier podcast, but I want to say it because it can't be said enough. Hitler was very popular in Germany. Jews were a small minority in Germany, probably less than 5%. I don't have the figure off the top of my head. But on the whole, Hitler was very popular among most non-Jewish Germans until 1945. Um, so it's kind of shocking. You would have thought that there had been more resistance to him. There was, but it was pretty localized and pretty small. So what happens is, when Hitler comes into power, he's quite serious about his attacks on Jews. He starts using the German state to attack the Jewish community. Jews are terrorized, they're beaten, their businesses are confiscated, they're sent to concentration camps. Now, when I say concentration camp at this point, what I'm saying is, think of concentration camps as large prisons. Certainly Jews were executed, they were tortured and executed. But at this point, the concentration camps were not the killing camps that you would see beginning in late 1941 and for the rest of the war. Jews are not being gassed in large numbers, I mean millions at this point, okay? This will happen after the war starts in Europe. But what it does is, of course, it lays the foundation for the extermination of the Jewish community. But it hasn't happened yet. So note that even something as evil as a concentration camp has a specific meaning at a specific time. But it was certainly bad enough. Can you imagine just being a law-abiding citizen and your store is confiscated, you're arrested, you're sent to this jail, you're tortured, you can be shot, or members of your family can be shot. It's certainly bad enough, right? Um, so by the mid 1930s, Hitler is continuing to pump this poison of propaganda into the German culture. The Jews, who were heavily represented in German finance and commerce and the press, the literature, theater, and the arts. The Jews were a mongrel race. They were a subhuman race that were undermining Germany's economy and culture. And so what you have is Hitler uses the power of the German state, the propaganda arm of the German state, to send out these poisonous messages about what a threat the Jewish community was to Germany. Jews are isolated from German society by the mid 1930s. Many try to flee Germany. Some are successful. Some just can't believe what's happening. And they think, well, this has got to end. Hitler just can't keep doing this. I mean, we're German. We're just as German as anybody else. So some left, many stayed, some tried to leave and were unable to leave. Then what happens is Hitler starts creating laws, the Nuremberg laws of the mid 1930s, which legislation is passed, although it wasn't really democracy, that stripped Jews of their citizenship, of any political rights, of any civil rights. Um, on 1938, November 1938, there had been an assassination of a Nazi official by a young German Jew who was very distraught at what was happening to his community. And Hitler used this assassination to implement what was called the Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass, November 9th, 1938, when thousands of German businesses, homes were broken into, were ransacked, synagogues were burned and destroyed, 30,000 Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. And so what you're starting to see is that it gets worse and worse and worse and worse for the Jewish community over the 1930s. Hitler doesn't let up. It gets far worse. Now, I'll stop here and I'll talk briefly about what happens after the war starts.